Mingle in Episode 6 serves as a masterful subversion of social interaction, transforming what should be natural human connection into a mechanized dance of desperation. How it corrupts the usually positive connotations of mingling, typically associated with cocktail parties and social gatherings, into something sinister and survival-based. The game Mingle forces players to form groups based on arbitrary numbers, much like how modern society often forces us into artificial social constructs. The time pressure element mirrors the frantic networking of corporate culture, where connections are formed not out of genuine affinity but desperate necessity. What makes this metaphor particularly cutting is how it reflects our current social media age, where we're constantly pushed to mingle in digital spaces, form quick connections, and discard them just as rapidly. The game's mechanics of rapidly forming and breaking groups mirrors the ephemeral nature of modern relationships, where people are valued not for who they are, but for their utility in a given moment. The term also carries a bitter irony in how it makes a mockery of human socialization. These aren't people mingling freely, but rather desperate souls forced into temporary alliances under threat of death. It's a devastating critique of how capitalism has corrupted even our most basic social instincts into transactions. Doors transcend their physical presence to become potent symbols of binary choice and false hope. Each door represents what literary critics might call a threshold moment, a point of no return where choice and chance intertwine with devastating consequences. The brilliance of using doors as a central motif lies in their inherent duality. In the Mingle game, each door simultaneously represents salvation and trap. A door might lead to survival or become a death chamber, much like how societal opportunities can either elevate or destroy. Choice and choicelessness. While players can choose which door to enter, they're ultimately forced to enter one, a cutting commentary on the illusion of free choice in modern capitalism. Inclusion and exclusion. Those inside the door survive, those outside perish, a stark metaphor for social stratification and privilege. Most devastating is how the doors subvert their traditional symbolic meaning of opportunity and new beginnings. Here, they become instruments of containment and control, much like how institutional structures that promise advancement often serve to trap and constrain. The mechanical opening and closing of doors mirrors the ruthless efficiency of systemic elimination, a process that appears orderly and fair but is fundamentally arbitrary and cruel. What makes the musical chairs metaphor in Episode 6 particularly haunting is how it corrupts a game of childhood innocence into a mechanism of systematic elimination. The traditional musical chairs, already a miniature lesson in competition and exclusion, becomes a grotesque amplification of its own inherent darkness. The music represents the rhythmic, mechanical nature of systemic violence. The chairs symbolize artificially limited resources. The circular movement mirrors the cyclical nature of poverty and desperation. The moment of silence becomes the pause before violence. How the episode reveals that musical chairs was always a preparation for this moment, teaching children that it's natural for someone to be left without a seat, that elimination is just part of the game. The Squid Game version merely raises the stakes to their logical extreme. How it exposes capitalism's fundamental lie, that scarcity is natural rather than manufactured. Just as the number of chairs is artificially reduced in the children's game, so too are society's resources artificially constrained, creating a deliberate competition for survival. When Min Soo hesitates to take spot, condemning another to death, we see the full horror of forced complicity in systemic violence. The game's music, the illusion of choice and fair play, merely disguises the brutal reality of engineered elimination. Anesthetic emerges as a multi-layered metaphor for societal desensitization. The episode presents anesthesia not just as physical numbing, but as a powerful commentary on how society dulls itself to ongoing atrocities. Survival mechanism. Players progressively numb themselves to the deaths around them. Each round of elimination becomes easier to witness. The psychological anesthetic becomes as crucial for survival as physical safety. Societal parallel mirrors how modern society numbs itself to systemic violence. The gradual acceptance of necessary casualties. how we anesthetize ourselves to others suffering through entertainment and distraction. Institutional control. The game itself acts as an anesthetic. Rules and structure provide a comforting framework for atrocity. Bureaucracy as a form of moral anesthesia. Most chilling is how the episode suggests that this numbness isn't just imposed from above, it's actively sought by the participants. Just as patients request anesthesia before surgery, society seeks ways to numb itself to its own complicity in systemic violence. This collective anesthesia doesn't actually prevent the pain, it merely delays our recognition of it, storing it up for a more devastating eventual reckoning. Suffocation emerges as a masterful metaphor operating on multiple levels. Physical compression. The crowded rooms during the mingle game. The claustrophobic pressure of bodies against doors. The literal struggle for breath in packed spaces. Moral asphyxiation. Characters slowly suffocating under the weight of their choices. The crushing pressure of survival ethics. The gradual constriction of moral space. Institutional pressure. The system's gradual tightening of control. Diminishing options for escape or resistance. The invisible hand of authority closing in. The episode brilliantly uses suffocation as a way to illustrate how systemic violence works, not through sudden force, but through gradual compression. Like a python's grip, it tightens so slowly that victims barely notice until escape becomes impossible. Most devastating is how the players become complicit in their own suffocation, voluntarily crowding into spaces too small for survival, metaphorically choosing to restrict their own moral breathing room in exchange for a chance at life. Rebellion emerges as a complex metaphor for the price and paradox of resistance. The episode shows how rebellion operates on multiple levels. Individual defiance. Characters choosing death over compliance. Small acts of resistance within game rules. The moral victory of refusing to participate. Collective resistance. Growing solidarity among players. Strategic alliances forming against authority. The power and vulnerability of group action. Systemic rebellion. Challenges to the game's fundamental structure. Questions about the nature of authority. The cost of disrupting established order. What makes this treatment of rebellion particularly poignant is how it reveals both the necessity and futility of resistance. Each act of defiance carries both the seed of liberation and its own destruction. And now, the episode culminates in a masterful sequence that interweaves all our previous themes. As the final moments of a mingle game approach, we see players making their choices, some rushing for doors, others standing their ground in acts of defiance. The music swells, then cuts to silence as Min-Soo, our moral compass throughout the episode, faces his crucial decision. Standing between two doors, he sees both filled to capacity. Through one door, his allies beckon. Through the other, a mother and child plead for entry. In that moment of choice, we see all our themes converge. The suffocation of moral space, the anesthetic of indifference wearing off, the rebellion against game rules, the mingle of humanity and cruelty. Min-Soo makes his choice. He forces open both doors simultaneously, creating chaos that allows more survivors, but also triggers the game's punishment protocol. As alarms blare and red lights flash, we see the front man watching through his monitors, his mask reflecting the chaos below. He raises his hand to signal the guards, but pauses as the episode cuts to black. The final shot shows a single origami crane, folded from the game's rule sheet, falling through the air against the emergency lights, a poetic symbol of how beauty and rebellion can emerge even in the darkest spaces. This ending sets up the next episode while honoring the thematic weight of what we've witnessed, leaving viewers to grapple with questions of moral choice, systemic violence, and the true cost of survival.